Happy November, and it is still in the 80s. Yeah, I'd say it's in the 80s. There's no wind. So welcome to today's Tinker video, and this is something that's probably going to be a two-parter, mainly because it's going to have to require multiple flushes. Anyway, this is what we're dealing with today. Remember that? Yeah, wait till you see what we're dealing with. Okay, so if you're new here, welcome. This is my 2003 Ford Thunderbird, retro T-Bird, based off of the Jaguar S-Type. And also they made this in the Lincoln LS. They all have the same AJ35, which is a 4-liter engine, but for some reason Ford says this is a 3.9. It's the same engine. So I've been fighting suspension problems, as you saw in previous videos, which I think I finally have licked, but as soon as I got those done, I had a new problem pop up, and which is something I had to deal with immediately. It's hard to tell, but if you look in here, there's a thin, I can't get my finger down that far, you can see oil in there. Now, your first instinct is to go, well, great, I have a blown head gasket, but mercifully, if I pull the dipstick out, it's all oil and there's no milkshake. Now, I've had this problem in this car now for probably going on 8 months. I haven't driven it very much because I have this. But I would like to drive it on fair weather days and take it out of storage from time to time. So here's my deal. I don't have any water in the oil, but I have oil in the water. And this car is equipped with one of those chintzy Ford intermediary oil coolers that go between your filter and the filter adapter. And I have talked to many people, Mustang owners, Super Duty owners, Lincoln LS owners, Jag owners, Ford owners, T-Bird owners. And they all say the same thing. These oil coolers, I mean, they're 21 years old in this car now. They have these O-rings inside and they tend to fail over time. And the oil pump pressure is obviously much stronger than the coolant system pressure. So the oil seeps through one way through the O-ring and it starts working its way through the cooling system and ends up in your bottle. So to find out what nightmare I'm dealing with, what we're going to do first, so I got a bunch of stuff out here, is we're going to obviously dump the oil. So I'll have to change it, got that. And I got my HP 1014 filter, and it took me a while to get one of these, but I'm going to take off the oil filter adapter and install this guy, which is an oil filter adapter without oil cooler. It comes with the new O-rings, comes with the new sensor, and then your filter just screws on just like the original one. So we'll be putting that on to bypass the oil cooler. And then in here, I haven't opened the box yet, but there's a radiator hose for that engine with no oil cooler. So what'll happen is it won't have, I know it's hard to see, and I'll take a picture of it and set it here. There's 2 intermediary lines that come off of that radiator hose, so that new one doesn't have the 2 lines, which means I'm going to bypass the oil cooler circuit because I suspect it's leaking. So that's the game plan. We're going to drain the coolant, which is why I've got this long length of hose here, because I like to run it under the radiator drain into some empty bottles, because there's going to be water, there's going to be Xerox G40, and there's going to be some Mobil 1 5W30 in it. So we're going to get as much of that out as we can, and then change the oil, and we're going to flush the cooling system twice. First time I'm going to run it and then let it get up to operating temperature, and then I will likely let it sit for the rest of the day, and then I will drain the cooling system again, and I'll fill it with just water and the second half of the flush again, and try to get more of that stuff that's kind of just like a thin film on everything in the cooling system out as much as possible. And then I'll drain it a third time, and I will replace this bottle because I have a new one, and put the G40 back in it, and hopefully that'll solve my problem. Now, if I remove the cooler and I still have oil in the system, then I've got a much bigger problem, which could be a head gasket. And if that's the case, I don't think I'm going to want to fix it. So very likely what will happen is, if it's more than I want to handle, because number one, as you can see, I don't have a garage, and number two, I don't have time, and number three, I'm not as attached to this car as I thought I once was, so I might just sell it with a disclaimer that it's going to need a head gasket. But I'm still trying to be cautiously optimistic here, and I think it's just the oil cooler, because everyone seems to say that that's what the problem is. So we're going to go with that first, crossing my fingers, and if it fixes it, then yeah, okay, I'll hang on to it and we'll keep driving it, because it still only has 70,000 miles. Unless someone wants to trade me for a 3rd gen Ram with a Cummins, then we can talk. Anyway, sit tight. I'm gonna take a couple of still shots of what I'm doing. It'll be draining the coolant, draining the oil, and all that good stuff first. So let me get to work.
2 very boring minutes later.
All right, so the first bit of good news is when I drain the oil, for those of you who don't know, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence if you do, but for those of you who don't know, water is heavier than oil. So another way to know if you have water in your crankcase is if you take the drain plug out, and just before it pops out, if water starts dripping out of it, you've got water in the oil. Well, thankfully, I didn't. All the oil came out of the pan with no water in it. So that's a positive, which means my oiling system shouldn't be contaminated with coolant. Huge plus. So I took the shield off over there. There's a bunch of 9/32 bolts, and a lot are 7/32 bolts, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of 7/32 bolts that hold that on. 5 around the front and like 4 in the back, but I only have 3 in the back. Doesn't matter. Anyway, those come out, and I took the air box and sensor off. 5/16 on the clamp here. Disconnect the air sensor here. And next will be to drain or take this hose off. So clamp here, clamp down there. Oh, it's gonna focus, clamp down there. This 13mm bolt that holds it in place here. And then the 2 clamps down here at that oil cooler, which is right there. And then, once this is all out of the way, there's 2 bolts at the top, over there, there and there. And there's 1 at the bottom, which I can get from underneath. And then that whole housing should come off. Now, what you probably noticed is I didn't take the oil filter off yet, and I haven't drained the coolant yet. I just wanted to give you the rundown of what happens up top first, because I had to see if I could reach those bolts, and it looks like I can once I get this out of the way, because I can just stick my hand all the way down in there. So now this is a part where you have to do syncopation. So you need to know what order to start dismantling, so that way you don't get caught with your pants down and fluid running down your arm because you pulled it too soon or you did something too early or whatever. So the next part of this process for me is I'm going to drain the coolant, get the cooling system all drained out so I can open this. And then I'm going to remove the oil filter and then try to get the housing off. Then the installation goes back, the oil pressure sensor connector first, bolt the housing on, screw the filter on, then install the hose, then fill it with coolant, then fill the system back up with oil. Then I should be able to start the flushing process. So far, this isn't very difficult. So far, I haven't seen any water ingress into the oil system, so that's a huge plus for me. Yes, I know this engine is completely disgusting and dirty because I made the mistake of parking it under an oak tree. Yeah, but I did drive it like every 2 weeks to the car wash, which is like a mile down the road and back. So I would clean it pretty religiously, except not under here. I'll do this later. Anyway, let me get back to work, and I'll meet you back after I drain and remove everything.
12 seconds later.
All right, so here's another bit of good news so far, is this is the radiator draining, and it's just straight coolant so far. As you can see down in that bottle, there's no oil film yet. Now, like I said, water is heavier than oil, so maybe I won't see it till the very end. But the fact that there's hardly any in it is a very good sign. By the way, this hose was from a computer cooling kit, do it yourself. And you just plugged it into the nipple on the side of the radiator there. And then you just loosen that nut right there, the wing nut. It's not Gorilla Tight, so you should be able to do it by hand. And then when you loosen it, when it starts to drip out of that, push up on it to keep it from dripping around that fitting. And it should keep draining from here, or here. Anyway, we'll see you back in a bit. I'm gonna have to change bottles on the fly, get all the coolant out, and I'll meet you back after I get everything else disassembled. So far though, this isn't really a tough job. The most annoying part is the entire world's population of mosquitoes are biting me, and I hate mosquitoes. See you soon.
A few moments later.
Okay, quick update. Neighbors mowing the yard. Got the coolant hoses off, got them from the top. Once you take this hose off here, you can get your hands in there really easy. Disconnect the pressure sensor. The tab is on the bottom. You can get it from underneath, not very hard. And then there's 3 10mm bolts. And let me tell you something. I used a crow's foot wrench, and that thing is miracled on there good and tight. So be patient, it will break loose. But if it's never been off before, it's real tight. So I got the bottom one loose. I'm gonna loosen up those 2 top ones, and I should be able to pull all that out. I just realized I have a second sensor, so I'm not 100% sure what one of those is. Because that's got 2 sensors, and the new one only has the one. So I'll use the one that it has and cross my fingers and hope that doesn't affect anything. Oh boy. Piss poor planning is something for poor performance. Yeah. Piss poor planning prevents poor performance. I think that's what it is. Yeah. Well, I guess we're gonna learn something today. Then again, this could be temporary because I may end up actually rebuilding that cooler, which means that sensor being disconnected wouldn't be a permanent thing. Anyway, I'm draining the oil out of that filter housing right now, and I know it's not focused very good, but you can see it there. I'll meet you back once I get the new housing on it back together.
20 minutes later.
Many profanities later, I got the oil cooler out. And it required me to take off the belt tensioner to wiggle it through this opening here, because that cooler is 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch too wide to clear the flange around the oil pan and that air conditioning line. I've probably said this before a couple of times, but whoever invented the design and layout for this engine, they need to be tortured slowly, methodically, and painfully for the rest of their lives. Like, make Gitmo look like an amusement park to this person, because that was a 5 Samuel L. level of frustration. The actual job itself, though, it wasn't really that bad. So now what I've got to do is I've got to clean up all that loose oil down there before I start putting it all back together. So that will be first with degrease. We'll install that, plug in the one sensor, and hope the second sensor doesn't trip any lights. And then put the new hose on. As you can see, it doesn't have the cooler lines like that one does. Put it all back together, throw half a bottle of flush and some water in there, run it. I might actually put the coolant back in because there's no oil in there. Yeah, I might do that. I'll run that first with the first half of the flush, drain it, then we'll do water, second flush, and finish the oil change too. sit tight. Let me get all this back together.
More moments later.
Alright, so this is where I like to call putting, let's see, how does it go? The proof is in the pudding, that's right. So the whole car is back together, put the air box back on, connected the sensors, took one of my little giant liquid syringes and pulled as much oil off the top of that water layer as I could. I think you saw that little still shot of my finger inside. It's still skimming at the top a few times, but I've got half a bottle of flush in the radiator. I got 6 quarts. I ran 5W40 European synthetic for this, since it is technically a Jag engine. It kind of fell in my lap, so I was like, well, if you got the oil, use it. Anyway, next is to fire it up and let this cycle. This is obviously going to gurgle and burp, and I'll top off. That's just water for now. But yeah, typically I use Xerox G40 because it's actually really good coolant, and I got Valvoline to confirm that it would work with this engine. So let me talk about the difficulty here. 5/16 socket, 7/32 socket, a couple of 13mm wrenches, 10mm wrench, a breaker bar, crow's foot wrench. I was going to use the hammer, but I didn't need it. Drain tube, electric ratchet. There's really not a lot to this. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it took some time. I think I started about 2 hours ago. It's just a meticulous process of making sure you disassemble and reassemble the car in the correct order, so that way you're not short on oil or you forgot to put the coolant in or whatever like that. So I would say that this job, honestly, as complicated as it might have seemed, at the most, 2, maybe 3 Samuel L's. Taking off the belt tensioner wasn't something I had planned to have to do, but you know, it's not a big deal. Riding the belt, still not a big deal. I would say at the worst, this is a 3 Samuel L job. What I'm gonna do now is start it, run the flesh through it, let it get good and hot, drive it to the car wash, clean the outside, let it cool off overnight, flush it out a second time, and then start keeping an eye on that bottle. And if I don't have skim on the top after 2 or 3 days, then I'm going to call that good, drain the system completely, put G40 back in it correctly, and then put the new bottle in too, because I got a brand new bottle. I don't want this oil scummed up one in there. So anyway, I guess that's going to conclude for part 1 of this project here. Part 2 will just basically be a real short video on what I had discovered. For instance, if this solved my problem, I'll let you know. If I have a more complicated problem, I'll start trying to figure out what that is in the second video. But for now, for the first video, I think this is pretty much a wrap. Everything's back together. Nothing is dripping out the bottom. That's just stuff from when I took it apart. I'll put the splash guard on after because I want to monitor, you know, if there's anything dripping off the bottom for now. And I'm going to run it over to the car wash and get a heat cycle into it. So anyway, thank you for watching. This is Pwnery Tinkers, project oil cooler removal, which is over there. And if you're new to my channel, welcome. But if you're a regular here, welcome back. Either way, check out my other playlists and see if my other interests may be of interest to you. That's all I really got for this one. But I guess what I should do, since I got you here, is show you that it still works. So let's start the car. Battery's a little weak because I ain't run it in a while. There she goes. That water cycling takes a good long while. So anyway, I'm gonna let that run. Car's in high idle right now, no big deal. Looks like no check engine lights with that oil cooler switch removed. Looks like I'm out of gas too, so I have to go get a couple of gallons. Anyway, there we go. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.
Well, the boy does have good hands.
Good hand. Bad taste in cars. Mother